Hello and welcome back to my channel. It's a sunny day at last, and I think spring might have arrived. I've arrived at pink on my rainbow shelves. This is my organizing idea for a few book talks, and this is the third set of books I've picked out from all over the house, all of them with pink spines or pink covers. It helps me zigzag around my collection. The Guardians by John Christopher was a science fiction fantasy novel that we read at school when I was about 12. We had some really good English teachers at Woodham Comprehensive in Newton Aycliffe. We had some dreadful teachers too. Often the dreadful ones were stand-ins who came for a term or two. We had teachers that the kids loved and teachers that the kids hated and whose lives were made a misery. But one of them was Mr. Watson, who was a regular teacher who we had when we were 12, who was brilliant. And he would act out the books that we read. I remember him, whoops, getting bored reading us Hemingway, reading The Old Man and the Sea. And we got to a bit where the word lunacy was mentioned. And he said, do you know what it means, lunacy? And about the moon and about schizophrenia. And we were all like, no. And he went off on this riff, this marvelous teacher, all about madness and psychosis. And then he got on to Psycho and Hitchcock. And then for the rest of the hour that we had with him that afternoon, and this it stands out as the most amazing class I ever had as a kid. He acted out the whole of Psycho at the front of our class, from beginning to end, the whole story. And uh, and we just sat there agog. We couldn't believe that the teacher had gone off piste that far and took us into this world of this supremely terrifying story. One of the books we read with him that year, apart from The Old Man and the Sea, which nobody liked, was The Guardians by John Christopher. This is a dystopian fantasy by the man who wrote the Tripods trilogy, which was televised round about that time. The Guardians exists in a kind of similar world without the Martian invaders, but it's a world all to do with class, where some people live inside the dome, and it's the conurb, and that's where all the poor kids live, all the poor people in concrete cities, and outside is the country where everybody's a bit posh, and it's a kind of 18th century agrarian society, and all the fancy people run about on horses and live in this kind of idealized England. And the story, of course, comes from two people meeting, two boys meeting across those differences, and one leaving the city to go and live in the country and trying to fit in. Um, it was really because we lived in a town that was concrete and poor. It meant a lot to us then. At least it meant a lot to me. Um, much later, when I started lecturing at UEA, my first proper job at 27, I was going to teach the MA in creative writing with Andrew Motion, who, of course, is very posh and very grand. He took me out for lunch on campus on my first visit. And after our baguettes and coffee, heading back to the English department down the concrete walkway at UEA, he said, oh, I am sorry that this whole place is such a terrible concrete jungle. And I said that the whole world, as far as I was concerned, was a concrete jungle. I'd been, I'd grown up in Aycliffe on council estates. I'd gone to Woodham Comp. I'd gone to Lancaster University. Um, Everywhere was kind of concrete. It was um, the first time I went to London, the first place I went to was the South Bank Centre. This was the architecture of the era I grew up into, and didn't see anything peculiar about it or to be looked down upon about it. Anyway, this is one of the few novels I know that kind of tackles um, that whole business. the generation of kids who grew up looking at brutalism everywhere. John Christopher's a really lovely writer, I think, and I'm not sure that he's in print right now. I hope he is. This is a great biography. Not Simply Divine by Bernard J. Of course, about Divine the film star from the John Waters movies. This must have come out not long after he died. Was it 1991? Anyway, I remember this being kind of scabrous and funny and full of famous people, and um, but the first time I was really aware of the kind of tenderness in the character. Is it Wayne Milstead, his real name? Glenn Milstead, sorry. Yeah, it gives you the full picture, the kind of rounded figure, and it's a lovely book. I hope it's still available. This was published in America by Simon and Schuster. Here's a novel from a couple of years ago, pink down the side. A very serious novel, The Hate You Give, Thug, by Angie Thomas, um, that was filmed almost straight afterwards. And I think the film did quite a good job of capturing the book. 16-year-old Star lives in two worlds. We're back to the two worlds business again. The poor neighborhood where she was born and raised, and her posh high school in the suburbs. And I remember that the most in this book, how she adapts her language, how she adapts her way of behaving according to which part of the day it is and which part of the town, the city she's in. The uneasy balance between them is shattered when Star is the only witness to the fatal shooting of her unarmed best friend Khalil by a police officer. Now, what Star says could destroy her community. It could also get her killed. Yep, I completely believe this. You were pulled straight into the midst of a community. That whole business of people living in more than one world really spoke to me. Uh, for me, it's a kind of class thing and a gay thing, but you can see how with uh, race and affluence and education in America, it's very highly charged and dangerous. So I thoroughly recommend that. I don't know if there's been a second novel by her. I'll have to check. Somebody said the other day was about when you read a first novel by somebody and think, I must read the next one. Years go by and you realize they've done more or they've disappeared, which is worse. It would be nice to have some mechanism. Maybe publishers should tell us somehow when the next book by that person comes out. I don't know how you do that, but that's what you need to do. You need to hook people into the writing lives of people. If they like the first book, the second one should be flagged up somehow. It's the kind of thing that Goodreads should do. Although I'm not sure what Goodreads is for exactly these days, really. Uh, Amazon algorithm, I can't talk. Algorithms kind of do that, I suppose, but they're just annoying, whether they work or not. Um, we should invent something that allows us to find out if there are further books by people we enjoy reading. That's what we need to invent. If you've got any suggestions, let me know. This is my very lavish uh, copy of Valley of the Dolls, which I've had since 1998. Norwich, I bought this in a cult science fiction and fantasy and horror bookshop where I was doing an event. I was doing an afternoon event, and there was wine, and I did end up buying a whole load of books to kind of express my thanks for them hosting the event. This is beautiful because it's just nicely laid out. I think they've it's an American book, and there's particular, I don't know what it is, wide margins, uh, certain kind of floppiness. Um, and it took me a while to read this. I bought it as a piece of kitsch, and of course, then I became addicted to reading novels by Jacqueline Suzanne. I remember reading The Love Machine, her book about TV from the late 60s, on holiday in Paris. Even sitting at the top of La Défense, which has this amazing view, I couldn't put down this 40-year-old novel to look at the view. I was so addicted to it. I read Valley of the Dolls sometime around then, and other books. The one that she writes from the point of view of her dog. It's either her or Virginia Woolf. Both of them do it, I think. And actually, no, Virginia Woolf's book is from the point of view of Elizabeth Barrett Browning's dog, Flush. Get it right, Paul. and uh, which gave me the idea for doing my book, The Story of Fester Cat, from the point of view of our cat. Anyway, Jacqueline Suzanne, wonderful writer, terrible writer, wonderful writer. Two films about her, one with Bette Midler, which isn't so good, but the other one, the TV movie, with Karen, I forget her name, the woman off Knots Landing. If you can ever get to see that, which is called Isn't She Great, I think. That could be the title of the Bette Midler movie. Anyway, she's been filmed twice, and they're both based on the same biography by Barbara Seaman, believe it or not. And that's a really fantastic book. Isn't She Lovely? That one's called. I would highly recommend that biography, but I'll also recommend reading Valley of the Dolls for yourself. Never look at Pulp Fiction and think you know what it's all about. It's always more complicated and uh, interesting, I think, than people think. Robin Ince's Bibliomaniac from a few years ago, 2 years ago. It's his story, his non-fiction story, his short memoir of during lockdown doing, I think, 100 visits to independent bookshops up and down the country. And he gets his backpack on, gives himself a bad back by buying and carrying too many books, lesson to us all. And he gets on the train masked up and goes to have these smaller events in bookshops. And it's very charming. It's about his addiction to book buying and his interest in everything and the importance of staying interested in ideas, in stories, in pictures, in everything you come across. He has a kind of burning attention. It just kind of frazzles on and on and on. And he just keeps on going, buying stuff and looking at stuff and having conversations and kicking about all these kind of remote towns. There's nice maps and pictures showing you where he's been on these kind of small bookish odysseys, and it inspired me. I read it at the end of a couple of years ago, and it made me want to go and bookshop all over the place. Although, as I've said before, the independent bookshops I went to, some of the ones that he raves about, I found a bit snooty and a bit full of themselves. And as I've said before, I'm much more for small, independent, second-hand bookshops. I shouldn't be saying that as an author, but yeah, well, maybe I'm just less fond of snooty places. Anyway, I really enjoyed that, and I like watching his stuff online. I think he's got lots to say. Uh, and I saw him talk, I think. Yes, we saw him talk just after that in Manchester. Well, no, it is pink, isn't it? Pinky purple. The Ghost on Saturday Night by Sid Fleischman, who wrote a number of kids' books. Ghost in the Noonday Sun. Uh, but this, I had a papery scholastic copy of this when I was a kid, and then managed to get hold of this a number of years ago and was delighted because it's so fancy. It smells great. It's set in the kind of Wild West, and this dreadful company turn up with this scary fella, and it's a kind of sideshow, really, where they're going to summon up a ghost. It's very short. The ghost is coming. See the ghost of Crookneck John, famous outlaw, murderer, bank robber, thief and scoundrel, hung 3 times before he croaked. The genuine ghost brought back by Professor Pepper, the famous ghost raiser. Don't miss this treat. Startling, educational. Ladies welcome. No children under 12 allowed. Saturday night, 8 p.m. sharp. Miners Union Hall, 50 cent admission. Professor Pepper. I could still feel the chilly clasp of his hand on my shoulder. I ran home and showed my ticket to Aunt Etta. He gave it to me himself, I said. Who did? Professor Pepper. He's a famous ghost raiser. She looked at me over the tops of her glasses. What on earth is a ghost raiser? Haven't you seen the signs? He's going to raise the ghost of Crookneck John on Saturday night, right here in the Miners' Union Hall. Poppycock, Aunt Etta said. The signs say so. The genuine ghost, too. I'll believe that when I see it, she snorted. Ladies are welcome, I said, and then I added with disappointment, but they won't let me in. Why not? I'm not old enough. Aunt Etta stared at me. I didn't have to tell her how much I wanted to have a peek at the ghost of Crookneck John. She could see that for herself. Well, I'm old enough for both of us, she said. We'll go. But Aunt Etta, you don't think I'd visit a spook show alone, Opie? Why, I might faint. We'll see it together. That's that. Leave it to me. I thought Saturday would never come. That's something I loved when I was about 9 and still love. Here's something that I read for the first time last year and became one of my favorite books of the year. Richard E. Grant's Pocketful of Happiness, a book about grief and losing his wife uh, and their last year together. And the work that he does, he goes all over the world and makes films and TV shows that have all come out since, things like Loki and Can You Ever Forgive Me. He pursues Barbara Streisand, of whom he's a great fan, around the place for a while, being a complete fanboy. And Nana, one of the things that he does is tell stories against himself, which Elton John does in his memoirs as well. He makes himself look like a right twat. And I really like that when people who could just show off all the time about their marvelous lives actually tell the truth about themselves, that they are a bit of a daft twat, because we all are. The people who don't do that, I distrust slightly, and there are examples of kind of memoirs by people where they're always the hero of their own show and they're always marvelous, and that joke about every chapter ending. Naturally they all agreed with me in the end, or naturally they all saw the error of their ways in the end. He doesn't. He's very self-deprecating, and he writes beautifully. Years ago, I read With Nails, his memoir of making movies in the 80s, and I think I've missed one in the middle. Again, that business of I missed the second novel. Nobody told me, or I missed the second book. Nobody told me about it. Anyway, years on, I was glad to catch up with this. There's some beautiful bits in this, beautiful bits of writing, and it's a book I will return to. Another book I've returned to several times is this Prestel. I don't know who they are. They're an art book company, and it's a monograph about Nikki de Saint-Phal, who is an artist who created these amazing sculptures in sculpture parks uh, all over the place. Lived in France. There's stuff in Paris. She did work on paper as well, but she was a kind of graphic, surrealist, feminist, crazy lady who had this amazing life as well. I read this book all out of order. For some reason, I was on a train journey. I was away for the weekend, and I read it all out of order. I think the book kind of encourages that somehow. And I've read it several times. She had a tragic time in that she worked on these huge sculptures that you could climb inside, usually kind of colossal women's bodies that were painted in all sorts of colors. But the actual material, I believe, that she was making these sculptures out of shed some kind of dust that got on her lungs and eventually killed her, I believe. Starsky and Hutch Annual, 1978. These were, for me, the beginnings of homoeroticism. We had a relative who would sit on her doorstep with a typewriter writing endless pages of Starsky and Hutch fan fiction that she'd send in to the fan magazines. And for me, they were They were the TV show I'd sneak back downstairs to watch when I couldn't sleep. But it was entirely homoerotic. I was in no doubt that they were either doing it or longing to do it with each other. This is a Brown and Watson annual, but look at the artwork, presumably produced in Britain, so it has a kind of certain verite, quite different to most American series. I love that artwork. It looks a bit like the Doctor Who annuals of the time. Right, I'm almost finished. I've got a lot of pink books. This is something I read last year. I found it in one of the snooty bookshops that I was talking about. It's quite expensive for an afternoon's shop, but I did find that when you spent 40 quid in one of those shops, they treat you nicely, much nicer than if you spend a tenner. Anyway, this was a book that I might not normally get, but I felt completely inspired to buy something about painting. And this meant a lot when I was doing abstracts, big splashy, colourful abstracts last year. And and that's led to the paintings that I'm doing this year. Anyway, this is by sisters Emily Powell and Sarah Moore. Start Painting Now. Completely inspiring. It's a bit yummy mummy in places. They're a bit keen on their kind of a bit like the crafty people you see, see around in posh towns. There's a kind of slight uh, being slightly pleased, I suppose. But the work is absolutely gorgeous. It's really beautiful. And they talk about influences, usually women. I mean, there is that thing as well of, the kind of weird gender apartheid of contemporary feminism. That's not what I understood feminism to be. But anyway, elevating just women. I think the work is really gorgeous. I love it when she pops tigers and polar bears into paintings and buggers up scale and swims it all around in colour. Like, whoops, shit, I've dropped that whole pile. Sorry, Socky. Um, she does good stuff about painting outdoors as well. Anyway, um, I feel cruel now that I said there's a slight smugness about it. There is slightly. Anything that teeters into lifestyle stuff and except then there was lovely stuff in there about an exhibition they put on the outside of their house, uh, pinning the pictures to with clothes pegs to the outside of their house, and it's about not having much money and not having much opportunity. That stuff I really liked. Maybe I'm just awful. Right, this is the last pink book, Kitsch Deluxe. It's a book about people's houses, and I love this. It's a kind of weird, tacky pornography of people's homes when you find out that other people like to keep and display the crazy stuff that you do too. Somebody here we actually kind of knew and visited their house. A woman called Mary Rose, who was a friend of a friend, had a beautifully a beautifully decorated house. She painted the whole thing herself. It's in here somewhere. This isn't it, but look at that. I love people being completely bold and crazy with their decor and just making their homes an extension of themselves. There, that's Mary Rose. It was like being in a Hanna-Barbera cartoon. That's what it felt like. And I was all in favour of feeling as if I was in a cartoon. Right, this has gone over length. I'm going to stop. That's my pink video. Those are a whole load of pink books. And I'm quite pleased with the variety. So I'm going to carry on doing these rainbow things. And next time I'll find a whole pile of green books. They'll probably be all about dragons. Anyway, I'm going to say goodbye and all the usual. Click like, leave comments, do subscribe. look at my Patreon and subscribe to that as well. And take care and enjoy everything you're reading. And I'll see you soon. Goodbye.